So, today is the 12th of July, 2016, and this is the third time I've been discussing this topic of the consequences of the United Kingdom's exit from the European Common Market. And last week, on the 6th of July, my normal interlocutor, Jeff Risner, was sick, so I had a substitute discussant by the name of Dane McCarthy do the show. Now, Dane McCarthy has an active TV show of his own on this same channel, Channel 9. And the difference between Dane and I are kind of slight. We are both Democrats. We are both wanting to see the UK and the United States succeed in democracy. And Dane has a little favoritism toward the exit vote. As a British Democrat who believes in British democratic sovereignty. I am more neutral because I'm not in a position as an American to make any comments on British elections on the 23rd of June when they voted for this controversial referendum. So it is up to the citizens of Britain and the British voters to make their own decision of their interpretation of the meaning of democracy, which is in bad shape in the United States and in Britain for several reasons. In any case, the UK was beginning to be weakened very decisively in 1956 with the Suez Crisis, but it was already in decay from the First World War. Now, on the 8th of July, I made a second show because I returned as the guest of Dane McCarthy on his show called Far Out. And the difference between Dane and I is a difference of methodology and thinking. I regard history as a scientific discipline which is made scientific by taking time and geography as serious. The literature people can leap over tall buildings at a single bound and pretend there is no time and there is no space. And TV journalists can be very venturesome using their imagination arrived from reading novels and plays. So today, this show, Jeff Risner, who is a Democratic member of the City Council, is back to the more disciplined, political, historical way of thinking, and we may have a third point of view here. So my first question to Jeff, what is your impression of why this vote of the European exit happened when the British in referendum decided to leave the European Common Market, and has led to new questions in the American banking system and the British banking system and the future of the European Common Market?
Well, that's a big question. Well, my first impression was I was shocked. I was under the impression from many of the talking heads that I watch on BBC and other foreign newscasts that the vote was probably going to go to stay in. And
Cameron believed that too.
Right. So I was.
He gambled and he lost.
Yeah, I was in good company. So I had to think about exactly what happened there, and I'm still rather puzzled by it. I've heard many people doing quick snap analysis about why this happened, why that. Why did England go for the exit, yet Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, Gibraltar, and a couple of other dependencies did not. They voted to stay in.
I think the key is money.
Well, that's good. Good an answer as any.
The Scots, you see, are a poorer society. And they used to get money from the oil in the North Sea.
Mm-hmm.
But they now realize that that is running out.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to stay in the United Kingdom now.
Right.
Because they need to be subsidized.
Well, that's true, but I think a lot of it is a little. It goes to history. Scotland has always had historically, since the time of Macbeth.
Well, that's a real long
Right,
time.
right. But nonetheless, they've had a relationship with France because.
Well,
they've always been.
Not Macbeth.
No, since Macbeth, since the time of.
What is the date of Macbeth?
Macbeth would be about what?
It was during the Dane law. It was during the 800s.
No. Macbeth was around 1200.
I'd have to read a Shakespeare analysis of that.
Yeah.
He's a fictional.
No. Macbeth was historical. Absolutely.
It was based on a Danish king.
No, well, we're getting totally off the subject here. Okay, so,
well, here's a literary expert. What do you think of Macbeth?
the point I'm trying to get to, if I'm allowed to,
Go ahead.
Is that Scotland's had a greater relationship with continental Europe than England has, a more beneficial relationship, because Scotland and England have historically always been at odds with one another. And Scotland, like you said, was a poor nation, underpopulated, underdefended, had to look to a larger power, a larger ally, and often enough that was Spain or France to give them a hand.
Right.
The same with Ireland. Ireland, the same, always in conflict.
Right.
So there are historical reasons, I think, for that. But we're just going to have to shake this out and see how what the ultimate judgment will be. It's a little too soon to say, well, it was economic, or it was anti-immigration, or it was British pride, or so on and so forth.
Well, to get to the statistics, on the 12th of July today, the Dow Jones average on the United States Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange. The Dow Jones average is 18,000, an all-time high.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is, on the part of the European banks and the Asian banks and all bankers of the world, is that they're rushing to safety.
Mm.
The pound is in debt, the euro is in debt, and the national debts of all of these countries is running on fiat money. And nobody knows where the gold is except hedge funds and probably the CIA. So anyway...
Well, there's not enough gold in the world to support all the money that's out there.
Yeah, anyway, the pound-dollar ratio is now... for $1, you get 90 pence of the euro. That's an all-time low for the euro. And it's an all-time high temporarily. Now, how long that will last, who knows? And so, in any case, the market as of the 12th of July is more stable than it has been since the 23rd when they voted for the X's. There was a panic the first 2 days.
See, the markets were caught unaware also. They thought that they were going to stay in, and they had bet that way.
Right. So
yeah, there's instability.
So most of the last year then, going back for a year, there was a relatively stable relationship between the pound and the dollar and the euro. And last year you had to pay, for $1 you got one euro 40. In other words, the euro is a heavier currency than the dollar. And now it's sunk from 140 to 90.
That's true.
Yeah.
But
so,
of course, when I was a kid, I can remember when a pound was worth $4.
Yeah, and if you go back to World War I, it cost $5.85 in 1914 to get 1 pound.
Yeah.
Well, the British lost money in World War I.
Yeah.
and the United States became a creditor country, and then they had to devaluate their currency. They had to go off the gold standard in 1931, and that meant that they had to devaluate the pound from $4.20. Well, they had to go from $5.85 to $4.20.
Yeah.
And then after World War II, 1949, they had to devalue again.
Yeah.
They went from $2.40 to $1.20, half.
Yeah.
And that's more or less what it is now. Okay, it's been stable with the dollar.
Right.
But where they're losing is relationship to the euro, because the gross domestic product of the 7 euro countries, the 7 rich euro countries, France, Germany, Italy, Holland, the Benelux countries, they produce more manufactured products and have more of a market than the British declining industry.
Right.
And so they are losing ground. And this is sort of like the last stand of the sovereignty of the House of Commons. The people who wanted to leave are saying, the House of Commons is sovereign. The House of Commons determines what is democracy. And we're allowing the Germans and the French to, with money, buy out the British politicians.
Yeah.
So it's a vote of, it's a reactionary vote in one way.
Right.
But it's a democratic spirit in the other way.
Well, it is. I mean, but a crowd can be wrong too, you know.
A what?
A crowd can be wrong.
No doubt about that.
But you look at though at the when Britain was trying to get membership into the.
They tried in 1976, a little bit late.
Yeah,
93. 93 they applied.
France traditionally was always vetoing them. You know, I mean, de Gaulle never wanted the British into the economic union.
That's true.
Or the common market. You know,
That's
I mean,
true.
there's different
stages
of this whole thing. You know, from 1946, 47 on up to now. So you had to be careful about what were they trying to join at that time.
Yeah.
But they're now at the point where they said, okay, well, Britain as a whole can come in, the UK can come in, and then the UK was saying, well, wait a minute, now we want conditions. You know, we want to keep to keep the pound. Now here, Germany gave up the Deutschmark, and France gave up the franc, and the lira went by, and the peso disappeared, and the guilder is gone.
Right. The British don't want to give up the pound.
Oh, no, we want to keep the pound. Okay, all right, fine, you can keep your pound. Oh, by the way, you know, we want to control our own borders. We don't want any of this thing.
Immigration. Immigration is an issue.
No, we don't want any of that. Okay, so all right, you got that. You get that. And here's a few other demands. All right, anything to get you in. So now they're in. Okay, all that wasn't good enough. Okay, I mean. How much
You're just saying you think that Cameron was right in spirit, but was stupid in the way he implemented it by allowing the referendum.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. The referendum was the stupidest idea in the world, and I understand why he did it. He wanted to stay in power. And this was a way to stave off his own conservative wing from coming in, challenging him, and deposing him as prime minister. I understand that. It bought him a couple of years. But to have a referendum on something. So this is the most important thing the British have done since declaring war in the Second World War. I mean, nothing's been more important than this since then.
All right.
Okay, and what did they do? They said, okay, we're going to have a referendum where just one vote will decide the entire fate of the UK. Just one person has to vote one certain way, not a 2/3 majority.
Right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my God. You know, the
I don't think the British ever had a referendum on anything. That's an American idea. They got that from the state of California.
Yeah, Proposition 9. Proposition 9, yeah. No, but it was ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. I mean, the U.S. Senate can't pass a treaty by one vote. My God.
That if you follow the Constitution.
Yes.
If you follow the Constitution.
Right. But, I mean, something of this magnitude, just literally, you could just have 50% here, 50% plus one vote here, and we're leaving.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as stupid as you can get.
Right.
You know.
It's very hard to have a referendum in the state of Ohio because the state legislature is very conservative, and you got to get thousands of signatures to get one. But in California, it's very easy to put propositions on.
Mm-hmm.
And the voters don't know anything, and they vote for yes and no, and they don't know what they're voting for.
Well, I think the same. You could argue the same thing with the vote in Britain, where after it's been done, people are going to Google and saying,
Why did we do it?
Yeah, what is the economic union?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, right.
I mean, you didn't know before?
Didn't know that, but that's true.
Yeah.
There's a very simple reason for that. The average British voter know what the House of Commons is, but they pay no attention to Brussels.
No.
This is a rubber stamp legislature. It doesn't have the democratic procedures at Brussels. The decisions are made by an executive committee in Brussels.
Well, yeah, but they have a European Parliament.
They have a parliament,
Yeah.
but it doesn't pass legislation. It is not a federal constitution.
No.
It's a confederation in building. It's where the Articles of Confederation were back in 1787, before the American Constitution was made.
It's an evolving. It's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress from the point of view of Merkel.
Yeah.
And she hopes that it's going to keep on progressing.
Yeah. And don't forget, the United States has been pushing for a united Europe ever since.
Well,
World
the
War
United
II.
States banks are, yes.
Well, no, I think it's always been always been a part of foreign policy, a united Europe. Always.
Wait a minute, not always.
Always.
Wait a minute now.
Find me an exception. Give me an exception. Whoever said I do not want a united Europe after the Second World War?
Okay.
Nobody.
Wait a minute.
After the Second World War, the U.S. policy was, we've got to contain communism. The best way to do that is
All
to
right.
have a united Europe.
All right.
What do we need to keep the Europeans together?
All right.
Well, they start out with NATO.
All right, let's start out with Truman.
Okay.
The first one to suggest that France and Germany unite, leaving Britain out,
Yeah.
was Monet.
Yeah.
Do you remember the Monet plan?
It was mainly for coal and iron and steel.
Okay.
Yeah. It was an economic plan.
Yeah, and Monet was motivated by the appeasement era. He was motivated by the French-German conflict of 1870 and 1914 and 1940. And he said to himself, France has the iron ore, Germany has the coal.
Yeah.
And if these two powers ever go to war again, that's the end of civilization. So the French and the Germans have to have a united steel and coal community.
Yep.
Very limited in scope.
Oh, yeah. It
Okay.
was. Yep. No question.
Now, the Belgians and the Dutch wanted to join because the Dutch Gilder had an empire in the Dutch East Indies and Indonesia, and they made money as importers of spice and coal, oil, petroleum,
Sure.
and morphine, and the Dutch Empire was a viable, independent empire up through World War II.
Right.
And it was the American, British pressure on the Dutch East Indies, which had and the Dutch government, which is in exile after Hitler invaded Holland.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And they said, we'll embargo the oil in Indonesia because the oil company was the Saccone vacuum. And Japan couldn't get any more oil.
Right.
That's the thing that provoked Pearl Harbor. Because the United States and Great Britain, with the oil cartel, controlled 90% of the world's oil supply.
Yeah.
In tankers, in fields, refineries. The other 10% was controlled by the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So Hitler, Mussolini, and the Japanese Empire and Spain, Franco's Spain, were all desperate to import oil.
Yeah.
And oil was one of the factors that gave the British and the Americans victory. Now, Soviet Union was able to win with its own Eurasian empire.
Yeah.
And Adolf Hitler was going to invade Stalingrad and was going to steal the oil from the Caucasus.
Right.
But it didn't work.
No.
So oil is decisive
Yeah, it is.
at the end of World War II.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Monet wasn't really concerned with oil because France was an oil deficit anyway. And the French decided to go nuclear, which was a mistake on the French part, but Monet didn't have anything to do with that. But Monet said, we got to have a European steel and coal community. And then later, 5 years later, European Common Market in general.
Yeah.
So then that expanded, and these six powers then were growing faster than Great Britain, who wanted to stay out.
Yeah.
Because the British said, we still have an empire. We're going to make money in India. We're going to make money in China. We're going to make money in the United States. We don't need Europe anyway. Yeah, so that was a British mistake.
Yeah.
Underestimating the success of the European Union.
Right.
Yeah. And then they decided rather late, well, we better get in now. And then that's when de Gaulle said, well, you're coming too late.
Yeah, that's right. The party's over.
Yeah. So we got the history a little straight there.
Yeah.
You want to say anything more about this Anglo-American cartel established in 1927, the Seven Sisters, and how that collapsed with OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exports. And we now have a new oil problem in the Middle East.
Yeah.
That was started by Gaddafi in 1970. He said, well, look, if the 14 countries that have oil fields get together, we have enough money to buy out the Americans and the British. So the Saudis, the Iraqis, and the Iranians, the big three, nationalized their oil.
Yeah.
And that put the bargaining power, energy crisis. Carter got the blame for world inflation. He was innocent. It was the oil companies that did it.
Right.
And passed the debt on to poor Jimmy Carter. And he suffered interest rates. And in 1980, Ronald Reagan won the election big on false propaganda.
Yeah, I remember those lines, yeah.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to bring the oil problem up to date a little bit.
Okay.
You got any comments or questions about that?
Not really. In terms of the British exit from the EU, or not really. I don't know how much that might have played into the average.
The average voter in Britain are like the average voters in the United States. They look at the price of cheese, they look at the price of milk, and they say, well, France and Ireland is sending over cheap cheese and milk, and we want to have our own independent farms. We have better quality. That's what they're saying.
Well,
so the farmers voted out. Those who believe in democracy voted out.
Yeah.
The bankers voted in.
Yeah. But that is interesting. You talk about the farmers. I think you're trying to. I think you're mainly saying rural versus urban.
Rural. That's right.
And I looked at some
not
of the.
Not the Archidendron, not rural.
No.
Archidendron is another ballgame.
You're talking about the average British citizen living in a rural community that's
who raises his own pigs.
Yeah, or depends upon someone who does.
Right, and sells it to local market.
Right.
Yeah. That's the principle in Ohio, Southeast Ohio.
But I looked at some of the election maps that came out of the UK, and they showed the concentration of votes. Metropolitan London was overwhelmingly in favor of staying.
Metropolitan London.
London. Now, once you got outside of London, like once you get outside of this, Athens County, okay, you go from blue to
pink and
God knows what it is out there.
So, that's right. That's right.
So and then when you went to other major urban centers, the result was still the same. Like Liverpool, which is dependent upon exports,
right?
They voted to stay, and also they have a large immigrant population there.
Right.
And then once you got up into Scotland, things were different in Northern Ireland, and so on. Same in Wales, the Welsh countryside overwhelmingly let's leave, but once you got into the urban centers, then it changed again. It flipped. So this conflict between.
So there are four dynamics here: nationalism, democracy, ethnic prejudices. Everybody is born with a prejudice.
Yeah.
Some people are still fighting the Irish Civil War.
Yeah, they sure are.
But Welsh is dying as a language. Gaelic is dying as a language.
I wouldn't say they're dying. They're holding around.
What, 10% of the population?
Yeah. They teach it in school now.
Yeah, so. It's like learning Hebrew in order to go to Israel.
Yeah, but nonetheless, they still speak. They speak Hebrew there. So.
Yeah, but most of them are doing the business in English.
But yeah,
a lot of people start with Hebrew and give up.
Okay, so we got three things. What was the fourth?
What did I say?
You got nationalism, ethnic prejudices,
and money, of course.
Money, banks. Okay.
Some people go with the money. Some people go with ethnic prejudice. Some people go with religion. That's something you leave out.
Well,
They don't want any more Muslims. They don't want.
Yeah.
Germany doesn't want any more Turks. The French don't want any more Algerians. And the British don't want anybody going through that tunnel.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Regardless of where they come from.
I find it so ironic, though. You have a nation that at one point controlled half the population of the world and a quarter of the landmass, yet they don't like strangers. You know, it's just kind of.
Well, that's the difference between the Empire and Little England.
Yeah.
Little England are the anti-imperialists in the United States. Okay. I had a professor by the name of A.J.P. Taylor. He called himself the last liberal. And he was a Little Englander. And he was very critical of the United States.
Wow.
Because he saw the United States upstarts trying to take over the British Empire.
Yeah.
He knew that the British were saved by the American Army in 1918. But he ended his book in 1918.
Oh, I see.
And then after that, he did book reviews on Nazi Germany and became somewhat of a anti-Nazi expert. But he never wanted to visit the United States. He visited Canada. He just thought the Yanks were ungrateful teenage brats.
Wow.
Although I knew an American student who did a PhD with him.
And how do you do it?
Well, his name was Noyes, and it was an old aristocratic name in the United States. And unfortunately, he died of cancer before he got his degree.
Oh, well, that's a shame.
But he was a student when I was a student, and I met him in A.J.P. Taylor's class, and he was the one guy I knew who was an American doing a thesis. And he was doing a thesis on Austria, which would be totally neutral.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
In other words, A.J.P. Taylor believed in doing a thesis in which your prejudices were not involved. Okay.
Okay.
Now, he had his British prejudices for his teaching.
Yeah.
But if you did a PhD, he originally started out with as an Austrian expert. And as his first book was on the German colonies, the 1880s.
Oh.
And his professor was a Jewish famous professor by the name of Sir Lewis Namier. And Namier was at the Versailles Conference to advise the young British Empire all about Eastern Europe and Russia.
So he was Lloyd George's advisor?
He was one of the advisors.
At Versailles?
Yeah,
Okay.
Sir Lewis Namier.
Wow.
And his original name was Nemirsky.
Uh-huh.
And he changed his name and
Okay.
he went to Britain. And his PhD was on the Parliament of 1760. He could be totally objective. And what he learned was that ideology was somewhat irrelevant. The liberal versus conservative was overdone. The real difference was the money. Who paid for the House of Commons seat in particular districts?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was the Namier thesis.
Yes, yeah.
And this was called a new way of biography. You do a detailed biography of every man in Parliament, and where did he come from, why did he run, and who was he loyal to? And liberal ideology and conservative ideology was somewhat of a window dressing.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it was who bought his seat.
Oh.
This was the Rotten Borough system.
Yes, right.
Who bought his seat was the important thing. This is George III, you know.
Yeah.
This is the old British Empire. The Parliament of 1860 and the Parliament of 1861, I think he stopped there. And then he started writing book reviews on Nazi Germany.
I'll be darned.
That was Namier, and then A.J.P. Taylor got into some hot water because his big thesis was on the struggle for the mastery of Europe, 1848 to 1918. And he was doing the old First World War thing.
Okay.
But most of the earlier scholars stopped in 1914. But he was original in going to 1918. And gave the Americans credit for bailing out the British and French on the Western Front because the German army would have won if the Americans hadn't intervened. but then he was finished with the
Okay.
Americans.
Right.
Okay.
Take a break.
But he gave very humorous lectures. Anyway, we were talking about why Britain recently tried to leave the European common market, but they're not going to be very successful at it because the voters who wanted to leave are in disarray themselves. And my interlocutor here is Jeff Risner, an amateur from Athens County and Vinton County, who is a Democratic member of the City Council and has had a hobby in learning the history from me on the American presidential candidates. And we had been talking about American presidencies before this British vote came up and kind of interrupted the American party conflict. Because it does throw a monkey wrench into the American elections.
It could. There is
Okay,
potential
would
there.
you like to pick up your version of this long discussion?
Well, at the moment we're
in the middle of the discussion. We got
Yeah, right,
the European steel and coal community, the European common market, and then I think we ought to name the six powers: Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, who were financially stable and they had credible money in the bank and could pool their money.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you want to discuss the impact that it'll have on the other members of the EU?
You're saying, what about the
By
28?
having Great Britain withdraw, I mean, how's it going to affect the rest of those?
Well, it's not going to affect the others very directly. In other words, the Spaniards are voting in. They think the American.
Indirectly, is what you're saying.
Well, indirectly is.
economic.
No, well, there's a French indirect. What are the French going to do about Algerian terrorists in France? They're going to have to come back to the United States and Britain for military aid, whether they like it or not. Because NATO still exists as if nothing happened.
Yes.
NATO continues. And who's going to put the money up
I
to
have
fight
another
terrorism?
question. I was wondering, and perhaps either Jeff or you had mentioned it, when was the EU established?
The European Union?
Yes,
Or the common market. Which one?
the European Union.
Okay.
Well, in 1993, the British made an application to get in. They got in as far as the market is concerned. But they didn't go into the monetary union. In 1992, Merkel was feeling her oats because they united East Germany and West Germany.
Would it have been under Tony Blair?
Tony Blair was a poodle dog for the United States.
Oh, yeah, but he was prime minister. Too.
He was prime minister, and he went with Clinton when Clinton was president.
Yeah.
And when Bush was president, he was going with Clinton.
But
And Tony Blair sabotaged the Labor Party. He sabotaged socialism. He called himself New Labor.
Yeah.
And what New Labor was, be an American Democrat and go along with the United States intervention in the Middle East. And if Bush wants to get into the Middle East, we'll send a token force there. If you want to fight in Afghanistan, we'll put a token force. But the American GI is the guy who's going to do the fighting, and the British will give them some intelligence aid. The British have better intelligence on the ground in Iran, Iraq, and all of the Middle East countries because they learned the Arabic language.
Yeah.
The Americans are tongue-tied, they're linguistically stupid, and the CIA has to lean on MI5, MI6 to know what's going on in the Middle East. That's another ball game.
yeah.
So America's in trouble, the British are in trouble.
Yeah. Well, I think that there was some talk when the British left, like in Belgium, they have a far-right group there too, and they say, well, we want to leave also. I think that is about as likely as a snowball's chance in hell of ever happening.
Yeah.
The Europeans are different. They're going to stay together.
Yeah.
And unlike Britain, and they talk about how the English and the British say, well, our sovereignty is strictly Parliament. That's all we look at. The European parliaments are just a joke. Well, if you go into Europe when they're having elections for the European Parliament, like I've been there when they're doing it, they take it, it's dead serious. Okay, it's not a joke at all. I mean, it's just as important as if they're voting for the Chancellor or the President of France. They are out there, they're getting votes, and they have candidates who are making statements and promises and so on, just like any other. I mean, they do take it serious. The British don't, at least some of them don't.
The British are hoping the Channel is still the Channel. The Americans are hoping the Atlantic is still the Atlantic.
Yeah. Who knows? But one thing that is interesting about all this that I found out is, okay, you had this referendum and it has passed, but we get back to what you're talking about, the sovereignty of Parliament. This referendum means nothing unless it's ratified by Commons. Unless they actually take a vote in Commons. Well, actually, both all of Parliament, the Lords and Commons, it doesn't get done. Okay, all it means is, yeah, you had a referendum, thanks, glad you had a good time.
Well, they still have to negotiate this Article 50.
Yeah.
They say, all right, this is what the new Prime Minister is saying. What's her name?
May.
Mary May?
May and July.
Oh,
yeah.
May and July. Andrea May.
Yeah.
Andrea May, got that kind of fixed. Yeah, she is the Home Secretary in the Conservative Party. She is now the presumptive Prime Minister, and she will be the Prime Minister. And Cameron is going to give up his seat.
Yeah, he's leaving.
Right.
He's going on vacation.
But then everybody says the Parliament is going to negotiate for at least 5 years, some say 10 years, to figure out what do you do about Article 50.
Yeah.
In other words, there has to be certain visa rules, certain tariff rules of just what concessions are made. You just don't vote no. You have to negotiate the visa rules, the tariff rules, the tunnel rules.
Yeah,
that's going to take a long time.
Right, and the tragedy of it is Britain, the UK, is not in a negotiating position at all. They're in a position of weakness. It's the Europeans that will decide. The European...
Merkel will decide.
She'll decide.
That's right.
Okay, the Führer will
but
decide.
Merkel wants the British to stay.
Yeah.
But she has to wait until Andrea May gets her act together. Because she has to actually appoint a negotiator.
Yeah.
Or she may be the negotiator herself. And then you're going to get down to the nitty-gritty.
Right.
And the French are going to be hard line. The French are going to say no concessions. What the British Parliament is hoping, that they'll be like Norway and Sweden. They'll get Switzerland. They'll get certain concessions on the rim. In other words, the Norwegians are not in the common market, but they get certain concessions because they got oil to export. And the Swiss get certain concessions.
Yeah.
The suburbs of Basel extend out into German territory.
That's right. Yeah.
And the Swiss need the European market for food. At the same time, the European market doesn't want an island of subversion in Switzerland, so they say, okay, we'll give you a little concessions on cheese and watches and technology and
finance.
Yeah, because there's technology. They can use Swiss technology, and there's this interchange of personnel. And that's why the Germans want to stay in Britain, because their young students can go to Cambridge, learn English, come back to Germany, and set up a little pioneer company. So they don't want to get out of
it is interesting.
So it's how advanced you are in technology.
Sure.
The technologists want to stay in.
Yeah.
The guys up in the upper 15% want to stay in.
But it is ironic that you have Merkel, who is doing her best to keep the UK in. If you rolled the clock back 25 years to the time of Margaret Thatcher and Reagan at that time.
Well, by the way, I'm glad you mentioned Margaret Thatcher. This new Prime Minister is a protege of Thatcher. She's going to be a tough lady.
Oh, I bet.
And she's going to be a tough lady like Merkel.
Yeah.
There's
Well,
going to be 3 women
Yeah. Well, the thing that's,
appealing.
yeah. But when East Germany collapsed and Helmut Kohl was chancellor of just West Germany at that time, the East German government, of course, was collapsing so quickly.
This is 89.
89 at that time. It caught everybody off guard. I mean, NATO was caught off guard. Margaret Thatcher was caught off guard, and so on. Kohl, of course, was doing his best to persuade the East Germans to unify with West Germany, come over. Margaret Thatcher was doing her very best to keep them from doing that. I mean, her thing was the worst thing that could happen to Europe would be a...
She's an old-fashioned British isolationist.
A united Germany would be a major threat, a major threat.
She still had Churchill in mind.
Absolutely, yeah. She was doing all that she could to prevent it. She was calling up Reagan and saying, you know, you got to put the pressure on Kohl.
Yeah.
You know, we just can't let this happen.
Reagan was listening to somebody else.
Oh yeah, yeah, you bet. Yeah, I mean, they was going. I mean, and of course, Kohl was doing everything he could to undermine Thatcher. You know, he was literally giving away 1,000 Deutschmarks to every East German who would cross over the border.
Yeah.
Yeah, here, have some money.
Well, it was 10 to 1.
Wow. I mean, can you imagine what that meant?
Yeah, you got $1 for 10 cents.
Yeah.
That's what it amounted to.
Well, what he was doing in
Is subsidizing the East Germans.
In Berlin, when the wall started to come, well, the wall had not yet come down, but the gates were open.
Yeah.
Okay, the Brandenburg Gate was now wide open. Checkpoint Charlie was wide open.
Right.
People could come.
Right.
Okay, but they were still living in East Berlin. They had to go home. I mean, so that was one thing. But when they crossed over the border, he had agents there just literally giving them 1,000 Deutschmarks for coming across the border. And what did they do with it? They walked immediately to the biggest department store and
spent their money.
And spent their money and took back all this stuff.
Yeah.
And now they go back, they still have the Deutschmarks in their pocket, and within literally a week, the East German financial system collapsed.
Yeah.
It literally just collapsed.
Right.
And suddenly everything was done in West German Deutschmarks.
Sure.
At that point, if you lose your financial sovereignty, which they did completely at that point, political sovereignty is gone.
That's right.
Yeah, the East German parliament at that point just said, well, let's just dissolve.
Well, Khrushchev said that to, was it Khrushchev or Brezhnev? Khrushchev was out in 1964.
That's right.
Brezhnev was in charge.
Yeah.
Brezhnev said to Gutwald, I'm not going to defend you. This wall is down. You got to make your own deal.
Yeah, that's right.
I got enough trouble with the Poles on my
That's
desk.
right. Yeah. Yep.
So the Poles had already led the way.
Oh yeah.
Solidarity and so forth.
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah. That was and of course the
Hungarians led the way. So they used to go around to Hungary. They used to go to Poland, Hungary, and around the wall before the wall went down.
And of course Tito in Yugoslavia was enjoying all this. You know, he was having a good time.
Well, he died in 80. So
but he foresaw all that. I think,
yes, he
yeah,
predicted. Yeah.
That's why he maneuvered Yugoslavia the way he did.
Yeah.
You know, he
A
saw
lot
it as
of East Germans were picking up, and Poles, and even Soviet citizens were watching Tito.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
Well, some of the
it's
biggest.
a long period of
Oh yeah.
softening up the Iron Curtain.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was this famous Soviet writer in 1974 who wrote a novel. Will the Soviet Union last until 1984? Question mark.
Oh.
That was on Summers.Literature.
Uh-huh.
That became a bestseller in mimeograph thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened to the atomic war.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, Sakharov was subverting the atomic sequence.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We can't fight the nuclear war. It's over.
Yeah. Yeah, he was lying to Khrushchev about the size of their weapons and things.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to the UK. I guess what I'd like to try to, if I could foresee into the future, is playing pretend that May, Merkel, and the other leaders get together and somehow they work out a deal. Okay, they get a deal in place.
That's possible.
Okay, And
Behind the scenes.
Yeah, behind the scenes. And then the Commons ratifies it and so on. All right. So now we go along for the next few years.
Yeah.
Okay, things like that. And at what point does everyone come to their senses and say, you know, this really wasn't such a great idea?
Oh, I think the Conservative Party's already agreed. I think Cameron says to himself, I gambled and I lost. I'm stepping down.
Yeah.
And it's got to be the Home Secretary that keeps the ball rolling. She's going to make the decision.
Yeah.
But personally, he thought he was going to win.
Yeah.
Rolled the dice the wrong way.
Well, you know, one thing I thought was fascinating about all this is, you know, Gibraltar is still part of the UK.
Yeah.
Okay. Now Spain has been wanting it back since since they lost it in the Napoleonic Wars, and the Gibraltarians have always overwhelmingly voted stay with the UK. They under no circumstances do they want to be part of Spain.
Right.
I mean, who wants to be ruled by Franco or Don
Franco's
Carlos?
dead.
Yeah, but hey, fascism in Spain is still there. You know, it really hasn't disappeared. But anyway, but what came out of this was they voted overwhelmingly to be associated with the European Union.
Okay.
Now there seems to be a movement within Gibraltar. Well, maybe we should start exploring some sort of coexistence with Spain.
All right.
So will Gibraltar then eventually go back to Spain?
Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't predict the future.
Solid as a rock of Gibraltar.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's look at this detailed 2 days from the 23rd of June to the 25th of June. We might call those the days of panic. I'd just like to present some statistics there. In those 2 days, the Dow Jones average went from 18,000 down to 17,063, 500 points in 2 days, from Friday to Saturday. And the pound was then £1, $1.60 on Friday, went down to 120, lost 40 cents in 2 days, all-time low.
Better buy a ticket to England.
And then, as you pointed out, it was 585 back in 1914, and it was 240 in 1945, and then it was devaluated in 49 by 1/2. And so this has not been the first devaluation of the British pound.
No.
See? And then Suez was the final recognition on the part of Macmillan
Yeah.
that the Commonwealth is here to stay. We're no longer even going to call it the British Commonwealth.
Yeah.
And we're no longer going to call it the Empire. And India and Pakistan are being recognized as equal to Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. No more white racism. And even Nigeria and Ghana are going to come in as independent states. Then they had a big problem with South Africa.
Oh, yeah.
Because there were some whites there.
Yeah. Yes, some. And Rhodesia.
Rhodesia, right.
Yeah.
So anyway, the British Empire is going down. And then the United States goes down more rapidly. Lyndon Johnson, 1965. Richard Nixon, the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
The pound recovers, not because of anything the British did, but because of the stupidity of the United States.
Yeah, yeah.
Who pays for the American arms? Oh, charge the debt. Let the national debt keep going up. So the American dollar is being devaluated every day during that Vietnam War. And then George W. Bush. What kind of a jerk is he? He doesn't learn anything from Vietnam. Oh, I can rule the Middle East. We can go into Iraq, Iran.
Yep.
We can do anything. Cheney can make money. And the problem is the United States cannot fight a 30-year war in the Middle East. You cannot fight terrorism with a military method.
Nope. Almost dropped that.
I don't know whether Hillary understands that or not. Certainly Trump doesn't.
Oh, let's not go there. I'm depressed enough the way it is.
So my solution to that is that the United States Congress has to define what is the difference between murder in the first degree and an act of terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
And an act of terrorism was defined by the British House of Commons. The British police would take care of terrorism in Ireland, not in the whole world, but in Ireland. The United States should take care of terrorism in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Now, who takes care of terrorism in the Middle East? The Saudis. This is Bezovich now. I'm quoting Andrew Bezovich. The easiest problem is a problem for Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the big four Middle East powers. They have a duty to put jihad down, not the United States.
Right.
Okay. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and Iran. Now, they're making a deal in Iran. There's a great hope.
Yeah.
The five security members plus Germany are going to try and denuclearize Iran. That's the hope of the future.
Yeah.
The world cannot stand another nuclear war.
No. Wouldn't do anybody any good.
Now, that's where we are now on as far as I can see,
Right.
on the situation. So I think we can jump forward rather fast here
Okay.
to some kind of a conclusion.
Well, my conclusion is, where's Churchill when you need him? If he had been around, this would never have happened.
Okay.
Well, there never would have been a referendum.
Okay, well, I'll give my slow conclusion here. Theresa May, I never got her first name straight, because Theresa May is the new Home Secretary who's now going to become the Prime Minister. And her father was a Christian minister, and we do have to establish a Christian, Jewish, humanitarian, religious background if you're going to resist any war with Islam. Okay, so that's one thing the common market and the United States have in common, is some idea of ethics. And that's going to be the problem for the United States to work out in detail, and the British and the Germans. Anyway, Angela Merkel and Margaret Thatcher are going to gradually renegotiate this referendum. And Article 50 is going to be at least 2 years and maybe 10 years in working out the details. And the UK, in the long run, will stay in the European Common Market. Now, tariffs are going to be an issue. Health care, safety, there are more blocks to trade than merely tariffs. That's where the Americans are a little bit narrow-minded. Tariffs are not the only block to trade.
No.
There are many non-tariff regulations that have to be worked out, especially on climate change. We have to have an international climate change. So as Ross Perot would say, the devil is in the details of how long these negotiations take. And the Labor Party is in disarray. They may come back if this takes too long. The United Kingdom Independence Party have resigned. They were only playing politics. But they did make the point that sovereignty is in the House of Commons, and that was their main issue, and they got that much across. So it is possible that the pound tanks, but it's some years away, and who knows the future. But the big hope is that the British will get Norwegian, Swiss concessions. And what I'm trying to say is that the visa rules, the tariff rules, are not 100% uniform. And the French are going to have to lean on the United States and Britain for intelligence aid. The Germans, in fact, don't want any more Turks. The French don't want any more Algerians. And the British don't want any more Muslims of any variety. And George W. Bush's war in Pakistan and Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, the chickens are coming home to roost in the United States.
Remember, we have 2 remaining.
Okay, I have a couple minutes, and I would like to show the audience the market gauges in today's New York Times. And if you want to follow this problem, I look at 4 of the gauges. The Dow Jones average, the price of crude oil, the price of gold, and the price of the euro. And those indexes vary a few dollars each day. And by watching that, you can predict the future. The yen is tanking. That's been going to be the first currency to disappear. It's been going down since for over a year. It's steady down. The island is too small. China is producing more manufactured goods. And Fukushima is unsolved. Pollution. So nobody's going to invest in the yen. There's some competition between the dollar and the euro. And the pound is treading water. That's where it's at on looking at these places to invest.
Right.
So the Dow Jones average was 18,222 today, a high point. But nobody's buying European bonds. I mean, U.S. bonds. They're buying U.S. blue chip stocks. Ford Motor, General Motors, Netflix. They're putting their money in private stocks. They'll hold their value better than U.S. bonds because the United States public debt keeps rising. I don't know what Trump is going to do about that. Anyway, we have to wind up. This is the end. And I will continue to voice my slogan that debate is the oxygen of democracy. And you and I have to keep the debate going within the United States and suggestions to the European Common Market. But Americans should be more modest in relation to the Europeans. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.